This is Face the State 2020 Vote, the race for Attorney General.
Good morning and welcome to this week's special edition of Face the State on the Montana Television Network. This morning we're continuing our series of debates between the statewide candidates running for statewide office. Today we're bringing you a debate between the two candidates running for Attorney General, which is an open seat, which means there is no incumbent. This morning we have with us Democrat Rafe Graybill and Republican Austin Knudsen. Let's meet the candidates and learn a bit more about them before we start our debate. First, Rafe Graybill is a fifth-generation Montanan from Great Falls. He is a graduate of Columbia University and Yale Law School and also attended the University of Oxford in England as a Rhodes Scholar. He has worked as a law clerk for the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in private practice and since 2017 as chief counsel to Montana Governor Steve Bullock. He and his wife Marissa have one daughter and live in Helena. Austin Knudsen also is a fifth-generation Montanan who grew up on his family farm and ranch near Bainville. He graduated from Montana State University and has a law degree from the University of Montana. He served 8 years in the Montana House, representing his northeastern Montana district, and was twice chosen by fellow Republicans as Speaker of the Montana House. In 2018, he was elected as Roosevelt County Attorney. He and his wife, Christy, have 3 children and live in Culbertson. Before we start the debate, let's just kind of go over the format. The questions will be directed to each candidate specifically. They'll have 1 minute to answer. The other candidate will have 30 seconds to rebut. They'll also have 1.5 minutes each to close at the end of the debate. Also, in the middle of the debate, each candidate will have an opportunity to ask the other candidate a question. The first candidate goes to Mr. Knudsen. Mr. Knudsen, tell us why Attorney General is an important office. Why should people care about this office, and why should you be the one that they would choose to elect to this office?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. The Attorney General's office is a very important office because it's the top law enforcement official for the state of Montana. This is the official that oversees the State Highway Patrol. It oversees the Division of Criminal Investigation. It oversees the state crime labs, as well as several other myriad bureaus. But I think the biggest thing for me is from a law enforcement perspective. I'm a prosecutor right now. I'm a county attorney in Roosevelt County. Prosecuting criminals is what I do every day for a living. I work with law enforcement. I'm familiar with the process. I put drug dealers in jail. And this is what's facing Montana right now. We've got a tremendous methamphetamine problem in the state of Montana that's driving up all violent crime across the state. 36% increase in violent crime in the last 10 years, Mike. So this is why this office is important, and this is why Montanans should pick me. I'm an experienced prosecutor. I've got the background and the drive to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Knudsen. Mr. Graybill, your response.
The AG's office is important because this is a position that really ought to be your advocate. This is a position that can make decisions that can show up on your doorstep and affect your daily life. Let me give you one example. Right now, there's a dangerous extremist lawsuit that would kill the Affordable Care Act. It would kill 10,000 jobs in Montana. It would hurt our rural hospitals. This is a decision that will get made under the next Attorney General. I will fight every single day to stop that lawsuit and to keep Montanans healthy. Austin says he's running to support that lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Graybill. We'll talk a little bit more about that issue later in the debate. The next question goes to Mr. Graybill. Mr. Graybill, you've been practicing law now for barely 5 years. Are you experienced enough to hold this office? And tell us more about why people should choose you as our next Attorney General.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's so exciting about this race is you do have 2 young lawyers who represent very different visions of their party. I'll tell you though, Mike, I'm the only candidate in this race who routinely litigates in the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm the only candidate in this race who's gone before the Montana Supreme Court, fought, argued for our values, and won. And I'm the only candidate running for the Attorney General right now who routinely litigates in federal court. That is to say, I do the kind of work that the Attorney General does. That's the experience I bring to this position. And I'll tell you, I'll use that experience to fight for Montanans' priorities. I mentioned this dangerous lawsuit that could rip away healthcare. That's something we have to fight to stop. Austin's fighting for it. Our public lands are under immense strain and threat right now from out-of-state special interests who want to sell them off. It's going to take an experienced advocate who's actually done the kind of work that the attorney generals do to go to court, fight for our values, and to win. That's why I'm running, and that's what I'll bring to this office.
Thank you, Mr. Graybill. Mr. Knutson, your response and rebuttal.
Mike, Rafe has been in Montana practicing law for 3 years. All 3 of those years, he's been in a cubicle in Governor Bullock's office. He's never represented a client. He's never represented a small business. He's never represented a farmer or a rancher. He's never had a jury trial. I think really important to this race, he's got 0 experience with law enforcement. He has never worked as a prosecutor. He's never prosecuted a criminal. He's never interviewed a witness or worked with a local sheriff's office. Rafe does not have the experience to do this job, Mike.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Knutson. You mentioned in your opening response, you talked about the problems of methamphetamine in the state. Tell us, what do you think is the scope of this problem? And as Attorney General, what is it specifically that you plan to do that you think would be an effective use against this problem?
Yeah. The scope of this problem of methamphetamine cannot be understated, Mike. And I'm a guy who's not big on hyperbole. This is a statewide epidemic. COVID-19 is a serious problem, but our real epidemic is methamphetamine in Montana. And I say this as a guy who deals with it every day. Roughly 90 to 95% of my prosecutions in Roosevelt County are methamphetamine or meth related, Mike. And that's a statewide problem. And I've learned that talking to other prosecutors in the state of Montana, talking with law enforcement, sheriff's officers, Customs and Border Patrol, federal drug task force members. They'll all tell you the same thing. The Mexican drug cartels are here in Montana, and they are the ones driving this methamphetamine crisis. 100% of the meth, of the heroin, of the fentanyl that's coming into Montana is coming in from Mexico. I want to cut funding out of the bureaucracy in Helena and get it out to law enforcement on the front lines fighting this problem so they can actually make a difference here.
Thank you, Mr. Knutson. Mr. Graybill, your response.
You know, Mike, for a whole year, Austin's been running on this dangerous idea that we should cut the Montana Department of Justice. And it's crazy. If you want to be serious about enforcement against drug cartels in Montana, you don't cut the Highway Patrol. You don't cut DCI. You don't cut the crime lab. Look, if you're serious about solving the meth problem in Montana, you got to be talking about 3 things. Enforcement, yes, very important. But 2, you got to be talking about treatment, giving people a meaningful off-ramp from this cycle of drug addiction. And 3, prevention, building resilience in our communities. That is so important. If you just talk about one, you're not serious about fixing this problem.
Thanks, Mr. Graybill. Let's continue down that path a little bit on this next question to you. Of course, you've talked a lot about in your campaign about the office being an advocate for Montanans. Isn't, the AG is also the chief law enforcement officer in the state. I haven't heard you say much about that. Is that something you regard as important, and do you have any initiatives in that area?
Absolutely, Mike. And I'll tell you, I'm the only person running for Attorney General who's actually put on a blue uniform, put on a bulletproof vest, and worked alongside law enforcement. You see, when I was in college, I worked at the New York City Police Department as an auxiliary officer for 4 years. I know the challenges, the sacrifices that our law enforcement officers make, and I will have their backs as Attorney General. That's why I'm proud to be endorsed by law enforcement, by firefighters across Montana, and I will have their back as AG. I think it is so important that we reject this dangerous idea that Austin's pushing to defund the Department of Justice. Now, he says he just wants to take away the increases under Republican Attorney General Tim Fox. Well, I have the receipts. The money that Tim Fox oversaw as an increase went to the crime lab, went to the law enforcement academy, went to fund 5 officers in the Bakken, in Austin's backyard, went to fund the highway patrol and sex crimes prosecutors. I think it would be a disaster for public safety if we cut those services. I will stand by our DOJ and help empower them to ensure real, meaningful public safety in Montana.
Thank you, Mr. Graybill. Mr. Knutson, your response.
Mike, I'm absolutely not going to cut the Highway Patrol, Division of Criminal Investigation, or the State Crime Lab as Attorney General. That's just fake news. I've never said that. What I said is I want to cut bureaucracy in the Department of Justice, which there is a ton, and we can talk about that. But we got to come back to some facts here, Mike. Rafe has never prosecuted a criminal in Montana. He's never worked with law enforcement in Montana. He's never sat face-to-face across the table from a drug suspect, a drug dealer, or worked with a local sheriff's office in a drug investigation. He's not ready for this job.
Now we come to the part of our debate where the candidates will question each other one time, And the first question goes from Rafe Graybill to Austin Knudsen. Mr. Graybill, your question.
Sure. Austin, you have closed access to a veterans park in your hometown of Culbertson, and you're now suing that same group of veterans to block their access. In sworn court statements, those vets said that in 2016, when you were Speaker of the House, you verbally accosted them. Is that true, or are these vets liars?
Well, Mike, if Rafe knew how to check a court filing, he would know that I'm not party to that lawsuit. I'm not a landowner in that lawsuit. I'm certainly aware of it, and I'm certainly aware of what my family's issues are and what's going on in that case. The unfortunate truth of that case is this is a problem that goes back for the last several landowners on our property. We've only owned it since 1991. My grandparents bought it in 1991 when I was 10 years old. The fact of the matter is we have never denied veterans access to that property down there. When they have asked, we have always opened the gate and let them access their property. I'm a proponent of public lands. As a member of the land board, I'm going to support public lands because that's important to Montanans. Montanans like access. They like to be able to get to their public lands to hunt, to fish, to off-road vehicle, to motorbike, to ride horse. These are all things that I do and they're important to me. And this is what I'm going to do as the Attorney General, and I'm going to protect those rights.
So, Mr. Graybill, your response to that?
I've done my homework, Austin. You're vice president of the trust that's suing these veterans. And these vets have sworn to the court that you verbally accosted them in 2016. And I think it's disgraceful. Look, this park has been around since the 1940s. And the vets used to use it to have Boy Scout jamborees, church gatherings, and to bring American vets coming home from war a place to go and have some peace and serenity. And the fact that you would sue them to block their access and then deny it here in today's debate, I think tells Montanans all they need to know about what you're going to do for public access as Attorney General.
We'll probably come back to the subject of public access later in the show. But next we have a question from Mr. Knudsen to Mr. Graybill.
Rafe, your entire experience in Montana is acting as Governor Bullock's chief legal counsel. We now know that one of Governor Bullock's former chief advisors was involved in fairly serious sexual harassment allegations, and that has gone on to other positions that he's been moved on to. Did you advise Governor Bullock to cover up the story of the sexual harassment allegations against one of his top staffers? And are you covering up any other allegations that we're going to learn about down the road?
Austin, short answer to your question is no. That staff member left the office long before I joined it, but I'll tell you what I have done in Governor Bullock's office. I've taken the federal government to court and I've won. I've sued the IRS and I've won. I've gone to the Supreme Court to fight for our public lands and public access and won. I've stood up to Big Tobacco, the same folks that are financing your campaign, and I've beaten them to fight for our Montana kids and make sure they don't hook a new generation of addicts in our state. I am proud of the work we're doing in the governor's office to fight against the epidemic of COVID-19, to make Montana healthier and safer. I'm proud of my work backing up doctors, nurses, public health officials. We're doing good work to make Montana safe. We're trying to find solutions. And I'm proud of our work in the governor's office. And I think it's exactly that kind of experience, representing the people of Montana in the biggest cases out there, that qualifies me to be Attorney General. Your experience simply doesn't match up. And I recognize that it's inconvenient for your campaign's narrative, but there's simply no question when it comes to doing the kind of work that our Attorney General does and that Montanans should expect and demand from their next AG.
Mr. Knudsen, your response, please.
Well, Rafe's answer is no, and I guess that makes some sense because in 2015, he was still in law school. But he was certainly Governor Bullock's legal advisor in 2019 when the story came out about these allegations and the cover-up. And Rafe was certainly in the office for the conversations with the Democrat Governors Association and New York Mayor Bill de Blasio's office, where this former Bullock staffer ended up and where this staffer was allowed to fail up instead of being held accountable for his deplorable sexual harassment allegations.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Knudsen. You made an allusion earlier on to the land board. Of course, the Attorney General is one of 5 statewide offices that sits on the land board, which determines policy on state school trust lands and other state lands. Mr. Knudsen, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the past, as a legislator, you have sometimes opposed or spoken against the Habitat Montana program, under which the state acquires private lands and puts it in state ownership and to create more public access. If you're a member of the land board, what's going to be your position on Habitat Montana in terms of whether it should be expanded or whether we should keep acquiring these lands or not?
Mike, the problem I had with the Habitat Montana program is how that money was being spent. I have no problem with the program in and of itself. I think it's been a successful program. As I said before, Montanans value access. They like to be able to hunt. I'm one of them. I'm a lifelong hunter. I'm a lifelong public lands hunter. Since I was 16 years old, I've hunted public lands. The problem I had with the Habitat Montana program specifically in that one instance was that it was being used to buy private ranches in Montana at inflated prices. We knew this was going on. We were looking into it during the legislature, and we had a couple of very egregious instances of it where the state was paying exorbitant high above market prices for private land. I don't have a problem necessarily with the state acquiring access so people can access other state parcels, but when we're using taxpayer money to what looks like give paybacks to Democrat donors and buying land at inflated prices, that's when I have a problem. And yeah, at that point, the legislature stepped up.
Thank you. Mr. Graybill, your response.
Mike, this is exactly why Montanans are sick of politics. You've got someone like Austin, you're saying he supports Habitat Montana, when in the legislature he voted to gut its funding. Let me tell you about my experience with Habitat Montana. 2 years ago, I worked with a family of Republicans named the Stensons out in Webo. They were victimized by extremist politicians, just like Austin, who tried to kill their good work to give us access to hunt and fish on their land. We went to court, we fought, and we won. And you can expect the same from me as Attorney General, to stand up for Montanans regardless of their party and protect our public access.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Graybill. Mr. Graybill, as part of your campaign, you said that you want to make voter registration automatic when someone acquires or renews their driver's license. I'm just wondering, is that really the role of the Attorney General to be expanding voter registration in that way?
Well, it's certainly the job of the AG to make voting easier. And I'll tell you why. The AG oversees the motor vehicle division. So if you go out there, you get a driver's license, right now you have an opportunity to update your voter registration. Well, the problem is that gets typed up into a computer and gets faxed over to a county clerk's office, where the county clerk has to go enter it in by hand. And that introduces errors into the process. Well, as a result, people's names get spelled wrong. You get these big lines on election day. What I've proposed is that the Secretary of State and the AG should actually work together to fix this problem and make voting easier. If you don't want to update your registration, that's fine, you can opt out. But I think it's the duty of every elected official to try to find ways to make government work better for the people that it serves. I think that's so important. I'm proud of my work, working with Geraldine Custer, a Republican in the legislature, to try to get this passed. And that's the experience I bring to this job, putting politics aside, working with Democrats and Republicans to make things work better. Austin's experience is getting overturned by Republicans who think he's just too extreme.
Mr. Knudsen, your response.
Well, my response is I think Rafe's running for the wrong office. The Secretary of State is the one who administers the voting laws in Montana and ensures Montanans have the right to vote and can do so efficiently. I think he should have filed for that office. But let's talk about MVD, because he's right. The Motor Vehicle Division is under the Attorney General's office. As I'm traveling around the state talking to Montanans, they are frustrated with the time it takes them to get their driver's license and the time it takes them to get new titles on their vehicles. We've got to get the bloat out of that Helena office and make that office more efficient, Mike.
Thank you. The next question goes to Mr. Knudsen. Mr. Knudsen, you've been an opponent of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, and you voted against Medicaid expansion in the legislature, which brought health coverage to about 85,000 low-income Montanans. I believe you said that the Affordable Care Act has caused more harm than good in Montana. I'm just wondering, what harm do you think it's caused? And if you're Attorney General, would you be fighting to abolish this legislation as it's now being questioned in the courts?
Well, Mike, I've yet to talk to one person in Montana who has told me that the quality of care has gone up and the cost of their insurance premiums for health insurance have gone down. I think that's proof right there of what the Affordable Care Act has done for Montana. Well, look, I have to be completely honest with you. As I'm traveling around Montana, people are not talking about the Affordable Care Act when I'm talking about the Attorney General's office. They're just not. People are concerned about the crime rate. People are concerned about a 30% increase in violent crime in the last 10 years. People are concerned about methamphetamine and drug traffickers in their homes. in their home community, excuse me. As far as what legislation I'll push, that's the legislative prerogative. I'm not interested in getting in the legislature's sandbox and telling them what they should or shouldn't do. The job of the Attorney General is to enforce the law, period. The legislature passes the laws. That's the laws that I'm going to enforce as the Attorney General, but I'm really going to be focused on violent crime and the methamphetamine epidemic, Mike. That's what Montanans are talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Gribbill, your response.
Mike, I'm proud to stand with Republican Attorney General Tim Fox, who looked at this extremist lawsuit to kill the Affordable Care Act and said he wouldn't join it. He wouldn't stand for it because he knows what I know, which is the dangerous lawsuit to kill the Affordable Care Act would kill 10,000 jobs in Montana. It would be catastrophic. It would close our rural hospitals, and it would take away health care to people who need it the most, people who need public safety services like mental health and addiction services. The Affordable Care Act is a crucial tool in our state to make us healthier and safer, and Austin's plan to kill it would be a disaster.
Thank you, Mr. Gribbill. The next question goes to you. We're talking about healthcare. You've also said that you want to use the Office of Attorney General to take on prescription drugs prices. And I'm just wondering, is that really the role of the AG? Do you have enough resources as the AG of Montana to really affect prescription drug prices? Is that a good use of your time?
Absolutely. Look, we're all paying too much for prescription drugs right now. Now, that's not by accident. You look at my daughter's eardrops. She's 17 months old. It's $50 for a little bottle of eardrops. That's not because of market forces. It's because of illegal conduct by drug companies. And they do it because they know they can get away with it. Look, the meaningful progress that we've seen in America on prescription drug prices doesn't come from the legislature. It doesn't come from Congress. It comes from state attorneys general who are providing real leadership on this issue. Here's what they're doing. They're going out there and they're looking at how drug companies work together illegally to inflate the prices of prescription drugs. That's been illegal in America for 120 years. But if the feds are asleep doing nothing about it, it falls to state AGs to fight for Montanans. I think this is one of the most important things the AG can do. All these politicians up and down the ballot are going to talk about prescription drug companies and their prices. It's the state AG that can actually do something about it. I'll say one more thing. I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race who is refusing all donations from those same drug companies. That's because I want to work for you, not the drug companies.
Thank you. Mr. Knudsen, your response.
Well, Mike, this is what happens when you sit in Helena and never get outside the cocktail circuit bubble. We've got liberal, very ultra activist stuff being talked about here. And this is not what Montanans are talking about. I mean, it's just not. I'm sorry, Rafe. Montanans are concerned about crime. They're concerned about drugs. They're concerned about the defund the police movement that you will not denounce, that I've called you out on multiple times, and you refuse to go there. This is what's on Montanans' minds. Portland and Seattle and Minneapolis are not far away, and Montanans are concerned.
Thank you. This will be our last question. This will go to Mr. Knudsen. Mr. Knudsen, I believe you voted against the law that would crack down on so-called dark money in politics, whereas Mr. Graybill has defended that law. Why is your approach better? Why do you think that was the wrong way to go?
Well, Mike, I believe in the First Amendment. At the end of the day, there were a lot of problems with that legislation that was passed in that session. We've seen a lot of lawsuits come about because of it. Frankly, a lot of them brought by the very proponents that brought that bill. You've got serious fundamental constitutional problems with a bill that tells people how they can speak, when they can speak, and on what topics they can speak. Certainly, we can all agree that we need to get money out of politics and we need to clean up campaigns. That's something that we hear over and over and over. But when you start telling people what they can say, when they can say it, and how they can say it, you start getting into First Amendment constitutional problems. And as Montana's Attorney General, they need to know, I'm going to stand up for your constitutional rights, whether it's the First Amendment, whether it's the Second Amendment, which I'm very passionate about. I'm a hunter, I'm a shooter, I'm a competitive shooter. These are the kind of fights that I'm going to pick as your Attorney General, not prescription drug prices and not ultra-liberal activist ideas.
Thank you. Mr. Graybill, your response.
Well, you heard it, folks. Austin Knudsen thinks that our cutting-edge money laws that stop dark money groups from coming into our state are ultra-liberal activists. Let me tell you about my record on dark money. I have gone to court against these groups. I have looked them in the eye and I've beaten them. I have fought for you time and again to make sure that our elections belong to us. These groups come into Montana because they don't respect us. They think they can buy our elections. And Democrats and Republicans have worked together over Austin's objection to pass some of the best laws in the country. You can count on me as Attorney General to fight for those laws and to keep on winning for you.
Thank you. Now we come to the part of our show where we have closing statements. The first one to give his closing statement will be Mr. Knudsen.
Thanks, Mike. Mike, after graduating from law school on the East Coast, Rafe Graybill showed up back in Montana in 2017 and went straight into his cubicle in the governor's office. Rafe has never represented an individual in Montana. He's never conducted a jury trial. He's never worked with law enforcement, and he's never prosecuted a drug dealer. I've done all of those things. After 10 years in private law practice in Montana, there was a drive-by shooting just outside my kid's school in little rural Culbertson. That's when I knew I had to step up and become a criminal prosecutor to get the crime problem in Montana under control and put these dangerous drug dealers behind bars. This is a problem all across the state of Montana. Everybody I talked to on the campaign trail has seen the impacts of drugs and violent crime that's tearing our Montana communities apart. And it's time somebody in the Attorney General's office put the focus back on the #1 priority. Mike, that's not taking care of bureaucrats in Helena. It's taking care of our kids and our communities all across the state of Montana. Folks, you've seen it here in this debate. Rafe just doesn't get it. And it's not surprising because he's someone with a very limited worldview who's only practiced law in the governor's office for 3 years. He just does not understand the gravity of the situation and the importance of the Montana Attorney General's office. I'm the only candidate with the leadership and the legal experience to be Montana's top attorney, and I'd appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Graybill, your close, please.
Thanks, Mike. You know, I think this race has presented Montanans with a stark choice between extremism and independence. I'm running to be an independent watchdog. Listen, when you run into a problem in your personal life and you have to hire a lawyer, you don't call someone up and say, who's the most extreme person I can hire? You ask a different set of questions. You ask questions like, is this person competent? Will they fight for me? Do they share my values? And can they get the job done? I am the only candidate running for Attorney General who has done the work of the Attorney General's office, who has gone to court to fight for you and to win. Now, I think it's interesting Austin's trying to rewrite his history in today's debate, and I can sort of understand why he might want to do that. For over a year, he's been running on one dangerous idea: defund the Montana Department of Justice. And if you look at his plan is to take away increases that went to law enforcement functions. I have condemned the defund the police movement. I don't support it. I've actually worked with police departments. Austin spent a year trying to fight against our law enforcement. I'll close on why I'm running. I want you to think about people in your life, loved ones, who have heart disease, who might struggle with their weight, who maybe have illnesses like addiction or need for mental health services. If Austin Knudsen is successful and his lawsuit goes through, then an insurance company could use those pre-existing conditions to rip away the health care of your loved ones. It's fundamentally wrong. We rejected it as a nation 10 years ago, and we should reject it now. I am the only candidate running for Attorney General who will wake up every single day and fight to make Montana safer, more prosperous, and a better place to live. That's why I'm running, and I'd appreciate your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Graybill. Thank you, Mr. Knudsen, for joining us this morning. You've just been hearing from the Attorney General candidates on MTN. I'm Mike Dennison. Please join us next week.